Hello and welcome. In today's video I'm going to show you how to gather. So I'm just going to make one of these to show you how I gather. There are several ways to gather, but this is my way. So let's get started. First I'm going to sew 3 rows of stitches. I've set my stitch length to number 4, which is my longest stitch. Yours might be 5, so set your sewing machine to your longest stitch. And I'm just moving my needle over to make sure that it's on my 1/4 of an inch mark I've made. I don't know whether you can see, but there's a little pencil mark of 1/4 of an inch, and I'm making sure that it matches up with the gauge on my sewing machine. So I know I'm going to be sewing 1/4 of an inch if I follow the gauge on my sewing machine. And I continue to sew at 1/4 of an inch for the whole length of the fabric. And I do not back tack at the start nor the finish. It's very important that you don't back tack. If you do, you won't be able to gather your stitches. What I forgot to say at the beginning was that you need to have long tail ends of your thread so that it's easier for you to pull it. So start off with a long tail end, and then when you get to the end, as I said, don't back tack. And when you pull your fabric away, make sure you leave long tail ends of thread. Now for the second row, I start 1/4 of an inch away from the first row, which will be 1/2 an inch in from the edge. And again, no back tacking, straight into your stitching, and sew a nice straight line. Whatever you do, don't cross over the first line. If you do, you won't be able to pull your threads tight. So keep a nice straight line 1/4 of an inch away from the first line. And again, don't back tack when you get to the end, and make sure you leave yourself long tail ends of thread. And for the third row, I sew 1/4 of an inch away from the second row, which gives me 3/4 of an inch away from the edge. I have put marks right at the beginning, I don't know whether you can see, so I know where to start. And then I use the gauge on my foot plate to measure. Again, no back tacking at the start, so all the way down to the end in a nice straight line. Don't cross over your second or first line, but don't cross over your second line, otherwise, as I said before, you won't be able to pull your gathers tight. So keep going all the way to the end. Just finish without back tacking, and again leave long tail ends. And that's how my 3 rows of stitching looks. Then I mark the centre of my piece of fabric, which worked out to be 9 inches because it was 18 inches long. So I put a mark in the centre so I can join my centre of my gathers up with the centre of my waistband or whatever I'm joining to. Next, you need to separate your top row of threads from your bottom row of threads. So you should have 3 on one side and 3 on the other, and you need to separate them because we're only going to pull from either the top or the bottom, not both. Next, we can start to pull up our gathers using either the top or the bottom set of threads from one side, or you can do like I do and do a little bit from each side. If the piece of fabric you're gathering is long, then you are best to pull a little bit from each side. So pull to the middle from one side and then go to the other side and pull from that side to the middle. So I'm just separating my threads from the other side because I did separate them, but they seem to have got tangled up again. So separate my front threads from my back threads, and then I can start to pull. Make sure you pull from either the top or the bottom on both sides when you're pulling. Don't try and pull from the bottom ones if you pull from the top ones the first time round. Next, we need to match up our gathered skirt with the waistband. I'm just marking the centre of my waistband, which was 9 inches, so 4.5 inches is the centre. And then I find the centre mark of my gathered skirt, if I can, and then I'm going to join my skirt to the waistband, matching the centres and with right side spacing. So I've got the right side of the skirt facing the right side of my waistband, and then I'm going to gently even out my gathers all the way along, making sure that the skirt and the waistband are the same length, and then I pin them together at the end, and then I pin all the way along. You need to pin on the side with the gathers because that is the side that you'll be sewing. You sew on the side with the gathers. So pin all the way along to the end. And I do the same on the other side. I match up the end, make sure that my gathers and my waistband are the same length, put a pin in at the end, and then continue to pin from the middle to the end. To sew my skirt to the waistband, I changed the colour of my thread because I want it to match this time rather than be a contrasting colour, so we don't want to see it. So I changed from blue to cream to match the fabric. Next, I sew my waistband to my gathered skirt, and I'm going to use on this one a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, which means that I'll be sewing between the second and the third row of my gather stitches. I start by back tacking, and then I very carefully sew, removing the pins as I go along. I missed that one. Anyway, removing the pins as I go along, taking my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, removing the pins as I go, and as I said, I back tack at the start now and the finish, and of course I've altered my stitch size back to 2.5, which is what I would normally use from the 4 that I had for the gathers. Not sure if you can see my row of stitching here. It's a little bit difficult to see as it's the same colour as the fabric, but it does go between the second and the third row of your gathered stitches. Now you can trim off all those loose threads. So trim the loose threads, and then we're going to unpick that third row of gathering stitches. If you want, you can unpick all 3 rows of your gathering stitches, but I'm only going to just do one, as this is just an example piece. And then I give a quick iron, but I'm very careful not to squash any of my gathers I've put in. So I iron from the bottom of the skirt up to the gathers, and then when I do the waistband, I go from the top of the waistband down, trying not to crush any of my gathers I've just put in. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this video useful. If you did, could you please like and subscribe to help me grow my channel? Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.